Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jerica Richardson, and I serve as a Senior Vice President for Equitable Justice and Strategic Initiatives at the National Urban League. How are you all enjoying the summit so far? Well, that's what we love to hear. I am so excited about this panel. I think it's so important for us to invest in restorative work, and that's what we do at the League. That's what a lot of my colleagues here at John Jay do. And so I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on how we're going to dive into today's topic before I pass it off to our amazing moderator. So we will discuss restored communities and cycles of perpetual punishment by restoring the rights and privileges of individuals impacted by the criminal legal system, as well as efforts across the country to roll back restrictions and stigma that undermine their stability and dignity. I'd like to introduce our moderator, Candice Jones, President and CEO of Public Welfare Foundation. Previously, Ms. Jones served as senior advisor at Chicago CRED, where she worked on securing greater investments for violence intervention programs as an alternative to the criminal legal system. She has also served as the director of the Illinois Department of Juvenile Justice. She was a White House Fellow and was a program officer with the MacArthur Foundation. Candice received her JD from New York University School of Law and her Bachelor's of Arts from Washington University and St. Louis, Missouri. And without further ado, I'm going to hand this panel over to Candice. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That's so gracious. Y'all know more about me than anybody ever should have to. So funny. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled that John Jay, that the National Urban League is facilitating this conversation. We are in an important moment in history to be talking about safe communities, are we not? It's so important that they have come together to frame or reframe this conversation about those things that truly ensure safety. And I'm thrilled to be surrounded by this panel of folks driving change all over the country. And what I'm really excited about is that this panel represents the multiple disciplinary strategies necessary to ensure change, whether that's programming and services for substance abuse, mental health, driving policy change, dropping down into states all over the country, writing state law, being a litigator and lawyer and policy person at the state level, or encouraging more access to post-secondary opportunity. You will hear from these extraordinary panelists about all the work and the change that they're responsible for. Y'all with me? Yes. All right. Terrell, I want to start with you. As we get started, I'd love for you to talk about the work that you are doing and why you're committed to helping remove barriers for those who are returning to communities.
Absolutely. First, I want to, say thank you to John Jay College and National Urban League for putting on such an important and timely event, and for everybody showing up. I'd say first, my core reason for doing the work that I do, which is leading, an organization that helps system-impacted people get into college, persist through college, and then get into quality careers. It really stems from my own personal experience. I'm someone who, as a teen, did not really, receive the attention and support that my white counterparts did in school. Recently wrote an essay about, my experience as a teenager, my mom working 2 jobs, trying to get us into the suburbs to get away from possibly being a victim of violence. And, lo and behold, I'm now in a space where race, at least from my experience, was a huge issue and contributed to me being a star student in the public school system in Newark, New Jersey, to now being, a student who really needed help in the suburbs of Union, New Jersey. And that story and experience is not too different than what a lot of men and women in the criminal legal system experience. A lot of people, specifically in the work that I do, have very similar experiences where they were ignored, looked over, told that they weren't going to be anything. Everything that as part of being, the part of the Black experience for a lot of people, a lot of youth, is what fuels our transformation when we're in the system. But I think we all can agree that we shouldn't have to get to that point when we're in the system to receive that attention, love, and support. That really should be taking place, in those teenage years to escape having to be in that situation. But again, what we see now currently is that, people with lived experience do this work for those very reasons, whether it's in substance abuse, if it's mentoring youth. A lot of the times, just the idea of having lived experience, being able to overcome and triumph over, challenges. I think some people may have the survivor's guilt, others, feel empowered, but that's really where my work comes from. I lived a lot of it. I haven't lived it all, but I lived a lot, and it just would have been an injustice for me to come home, go through college, not once, but twice, earn what I'm earning now, have the family that I have now, and just like go on and live my life. I consistently thought about those who I was leaving behind.
And talk about how your organization works to address those that you're ensuring aren't left behind.
Absolutely. So we have, a mission to continue to work with, system-impacted people across the country, also in several other countries outside of the U.S., to not just only get people through post-secondary education, not just to get them into careers that really speak to them, but the more important piece, and probably central to this conversation, is the policy framework. So again, to just thrive on the outside, which we're trying to move into that position of thriving as opposed to just surviving out here, but we really want to be in a position where we're influencing legislation. And I think system-impacted people aren't currently in a position, as was mentioned earlier, where we're at the table and making decisions, informed decisions on the policies that are going to impact us. A lot of the times we're invited to speak from our own personal experiences. A lot of the times we're invited to just, check a box to make sure that, oh, do we have somebody with prison experience here? Got them. But how many times are we the ones that are holding like congressional hearings or, inviting other policymakers to the table? So that's something that we're very intentional about doing with FICGN, and it's really matching, the theme of our organization is matching our post-secondary education attainment, because we are a very small population within the entire criminal legal system. Not everyone has a college degree. So it's really about, or have access to a college degree. So for us, it's really about, one, increasing that number, but then two, taking what we've learned. We've been in the streets, we've learned what we learned there. We've been on the college campus, we learned what we learned there. And now what are we doing to really change and influence policy?
Malik, you also work at an organization that serves, like Terrell's, really about empowering and positioning people who are returning to communities. Talk about the work at TASC and how they serve.
Yeah, sure. So for those that are unfamiliar with TASC, we are a statewide nonprofit where we work at the intersection of behavioral health and the criminal legal system. We operate in all 102 counties, 46 judicial circuits, and all 5 parole districts across the state. Our focus is...
Of Illinois.
Yes, of Illinois. I'm sorry. Thank you for pointing that out. Thank you. We focus on moving justice-involved youth and adults out of what we consider to be costly, deep institutional systems into community-based treatment. And we have over 250 plus professionally trained case managers that provide what we refer to as specialized case management. And so that includes screening, assessing, and then ultimately linking these individuals to the type of inpatient or outpatient treatment, and other supportive services, including but not limited to housing, vocational training, employment, and even helping them to enroll in public health benefits. The reason we focus on treatment, some say, well, why is the heavy emphasis on treatment? I'm going to throw out two statistics for you. Number one, 85% of the U.S. prison population has an active substance use disorder and or have been incarcerated due to a crime that was linked to drugs or drug use. In addition to that, 97% of individuals who are incarcerated have had at least one childhood trauma experience. And so the combination of those two is pretty much a destructive force for many of the clients that we work with. And in our opinion, and as the research indicates, is inextricably linked to one of the entry points to the criminal legal system. A big bulk of our work is helping individuals who are entering and leaving Illinois prisons. And so we have a division that is organized around two departments, a pre-release department and a post-release department. We did that intentionally. And through those two departments, we provide specialized case management behind the walls and when they leave prison as well. We serve about 5,000 men and women annually through our corrections transition programs. The way that we've organized these two departments also allows or facilitates a warm handoff, which is critical. And so our pre-release team is working closely with the client who's incarcerated, as well as jail officials, to help them complete treatment and or goals while they're incarcerated. And the achievement of these goals also helps them to earn credit for early release. And at the 90, 60, and 30-day outs from their release date, the pre-release team is working in tandem with the post-release team to develop what we refer to as a reentry plan. So we've already got them linked to treatment. We've already reviewed and come up with a course of action to help them complete their parole mandates. And then also answer any other questions that they might have, and also link them to other supportive services like housing, simple stuff too, like obtaining a government-issued ID, right? Getting them, again, enrolled in Medicaid. So that's some of the work that we do, and we know it works because we have research that shows that individuals, incarcerated individuals that complete our program are 44% less likely to recidivate within a 7-year period. And so we're really proud of that work, and we're looking to expand it to other states beyond Illinois.
Both Malik and Terrell work at organizations that are trying to find ways to serve individuals who are coming home, knowing that research shows that folks with an educational degree have an exponentially less chance of recidivating, and Malik has just talked about the data around substance use. I'm coming to you, Whitley, because Terrell started to foreshadow in his work the need for policy change, the need to have people who are impacted driving that change. I know you have an incredible career as a litigator, as an advocate, as a policy change, sort of forward thinker. Talk about your work for what that pun was intended at Forward and why it's important, the role that that organization is playing.
Absolutely. So I'm Whitley Carpenter. I'm with Forward Justice in Durham, North Carolina, and I'm Criminal Justice Counsel and Policy Manager, which means all of our campaigns related to criminal justice are the things that I oversee, and specifically about reentry and ending perpetual punishment, as we're talking about today. For 5 years after law school, I did the reentry services. I traveled to, I think, 62 counties in North Carolina, filing expungements for people to try to clean their records. And we have service providers, but what was missing was the policy advocacy and changing the policies that make it so hard for people to reenter. And that is one of the many campaigns. We talk about Clean Slate, which I'm sure Sheena will talk about a bit more. We have our Unlock Our Vote campaign, which you mentioned litigation, in making it such that people that have been convicted of felonies can have a right to vote after they've been convicted of a felony, and challenging that in the state courts. We talk about ending criminal justice debt and the cycle of poverty and the cycles that keeps people in the criminal legal system just because you can't afford to get out of it. And so with each of these policies, we approach them in the ways that are going to be most effective. Sometimes it's in the court, sometimes it's in the legislature, sometimes it's in administrative advocacy, working with the local government, working with folks more at the local level to implement policies that can then be recreated in other spaces. And we do this. We can talk about the numbers, we can talk about the data, we can talk about recidivism, we can talk about research, but I do it because I believe in human dignity. That's why I do it. I truly believe that everybody deserves a second chance, and sometimes a third chance, a fourth chance, a fifth chance, or a sixth chance. Everybody makes mistakes, and just because someone made a more severe mistake or was caught making a mistake, to be honest, doesn't mean that should follow them for the rest of their lives. And so we have to figure out how we can implement policies that allow people to move past those mistakes and to contribute to society, because that's all we all want to do. And we can talk about the economic argument for that. We can talk about the public safety argument for that. But I do it because I believe that it's the right thing to do. And I truly believe in giving people a chance to show you that we can be good people.
And she took my answer, so don't ask me.
We gonna give it back to you, lady. Sheena and I are
back,
friends, so she not gonna act right, y'all. Senator Miranda, I want to come to you because Whitley was just talking about one of the things that she does in her organization is change policy. And you know a thing or two about writing laws. You were in the congressional seat in your state in Massachusetts and now have just joined the Senate. And in these roles, you have driven change on these issues. Talk about that work.
So first, you upgraded me. I've only been in the Mass House and Mass Senate. No Congress yet. Not yet. Just happy to be here. I want to echo what everyone said about the honor, being in spaces where you're around like-minded people. I want to tell a little story before I talk about changing policy, because it just shows you how much representation really matters. So 5 years ago in 2017, I was running a nonprofit in my neighborhood. I've always been a youth and community organizer. I went to Wellesley after graduating from a Boston public school and decided to come back to my community to work in youth work because so many people poured into me. I had a good career, saved a lot of kids, worked with a lot of young people and youth workers, and in 2017, my baby brother went to a Boston nightclub and never made it home. And he was killed outside of a nightclub after multiple people were shot after a robbery. And it's interesting because he didn't get shot in our very dangerous community. He was shot in a very public place. And Michael's death really changed me. Not because he was the first. I actually have been losing people to gun violence for 18 years. And the month that I walked onto the campus of Wellesley, my father and brother, oldest brother, who were both serving time, all the men in my family have served some type of time, were both deported. So I know about incarceration, I know about family separation, and I know about homicide. So after Michael's death, like many people, when something chaotic happens in your life, you either fight or you flight, right? After a couple of months of really deep grief, people kept saying to me, why don't you run for office? And this is something that's really important for me to say, particularly those of us that are in northern states. Massachusetts says it's a very liberal state. It has an identity crisis. We send very liberal senators to Washington, and we have Republican governors most of the time. And I say this because there was only one black woman in the entire Massachusetts legislature in 2017 out of 200 legislators. And when I got elected in 2018, there were now 4. And we've kind of straddled between 4 and 5 black women out of 200 legislators, which isn't nearly enough. And around the country, black women make about 5% of state legislatures. In Massachusetts, we make 2%. Neither 2 or 5% is sufficient. So I run for office and I win, and I didn't even know how to write a law when I got started, but thankfully I got help from organizations like the Urban League, like organizations like the ACLU, like organizations like the AACC, which are brothers who are incarcerated at one of our Department of Correction facilities, because just because they're locked up doesn't mean they're not brilliant. And they've helped usher in multiple pieces of legislation at the Massachusetts State Legislature, because when we get elected, we serve the people we're meant to serve in a higher capacity. And so I have worked a lot on the carceral system just because of lived experience. When you talk about growing up with a father and all 4 brothers incarcerated, when you talk about losing a sibling to gun violence, when I got to the state legislature, I asked 2 big questions. One was, show me the money. And really fighting through, and this is why I need to talk to progressive people for a second. Just because you're progressive doesn't mean you don't cause harm. And I found that there was a lot of allies in the State House who were from progressive, wealthy cities and towns, but they just wouldn't move out the way. Because I was like, hey, we're here now, right? We're here now. We've been here since 1973, but the point is that as soon as I got there, the resistance wasn't from the Republicans. The resistance wasn't from male colleagues. The resistance was mostly from white women from wealthy towns who thought they were really progressive, but their way was the way that they wanted to see be done. And so just recently, super excited, I work a lot on the criminal legal system, and one of my bills, rights restoration, just got voted favorably out of committee, which is a big deal. And one of the reasons it's a big deal is because it was a constitutional amendment. So Massachusetts actually had the right to vote for all people who were incarcerated until 20 years ago, when they started organizing in the jails and they formed a pact. And the governor then, Cellucci, who was a Republican, very staunch Republican, really took it to the ballots, and they removed the right to vote for Massachusetts folks who are incarcerated. So a lot about lived experience, a lot about coalition building, and if I could say the one piece of success that I think has led to this bill coming out of committee is we actually actively work with currently incarcerated people and do not leave them out of the conversation. They can mobilize their communities better than any community organizer I've ever seen.
Sheena Meade, that's a setup for you. Because there are a few
Show me the way.
people who know as much about rights restoration and mobilizing communities. Talk about the work that, I want you to talk about the incredible work that you're doing. You know, Senator Miranda talked about what she's trying to do in the state of Massachusetts, and you actually are leading an initiative that's going in multiple states. But I'd also, since we brought up rights restoration, love for you to talk about what you were able to mobilize in Florida that allowed the country to learn about that issue.
Yes.
So
Thank you, Candice, and thank you everyone for coming to our session, and John Jay and Urban League for inviting us. So, so I think this is a great segue into the work that I'm doing now. So in 2019, was it 2018, y'all? Sorry, the pandemic give you years you can't remember. In 2018, my partner, my husband, Desmond Meade, had led the initiative to restore voting rights in Florida to 1.4 million people with felony convictions. And I was a part of that initiative, and it was historical. It was a big win. It was the largest expansion of voting rights since the women's suffrage movement. I need y'all to really understand. Okay, yeah. It could be a little louder. I mean, it was just the largest expansion of voting rights. Maybe my mic is not up. Yeah.
turn up.
Okay.
Since 1920.
Okay, I mean, they say it was a blow to Jim Crow. It was actually, Florida was one of 4 states that had a permanent ban that prevented people from being able to vote. Like, literally, you could lose your voting rights in Florida, and I'm just gonna give the silliest, simplest thing, for catching a lobster that's not the right size, or burning tires in a public place, but yet you lose your voting rights for life. And one thing that Desmond used to say was, it started out like a cancer, like a tumor. It wasn't meant for everybody when the law came into place, but as a cancer started spreading, and when it started spreading to other communities, people start talking about it. This ain't right. And we was able to pass that initiative with, it was not a bipartisan effort, let me just say this. It was a grassroots effort that welcomed bipartisan support. And the people let me say it loud, the people passed that ballot initiative, and over 5 million people voted yes on Amendment 4. That was 1 million more votes than the current governor got that year. 5 million people from all political persuasions who said yes on 4, who believed in second chances and redemption. And so that was the power play in 2018. And then when there was, people didn't think it was possible, they didn't think it could happen, and when it happened, they was like, you know what? Since y'all did that, we could put a little poll tax on top of that. Y'all need to pay your fines and fees. So we was like, well, where some people see obstacles, we see opportunities, because like, how are we gonna organize and find all these returning citizens anyway? And it was a way to say, we'll pay off the fines and fees, and that's where, supporters, donors from all across the country, celebrities, LeBron, John Legend, and folks, they raised over $30 million to pay off fines and fees to make sure that people got back to the ballot box and continue to do that work. And so that actually created, I would say, a blueprint for the work that I'm doing now. So I lead the work at the Clean Slate Initiative, where we focus on removing barriers for folks who have a record. So just to give some context, because we always go, especially at these conferences, always go right to people who's been formerly incarcerated. Well, let me tell you, there are more than 114 million Americans. That is 1 in 3 people. I just want you to take a second before I finish this. Look around the room, because they're in here. 1 in 3 people who have an arrest or conviction on their record. And so this thing is close to home to a lot of people. And so what we focus on is removing those barriers by helping people clear their records. So right now, out of all those folks that have an arrest or a conviction, there are 30 million people who are eligible right now to get their record clear across the country. 30 million, but less than 10% get it done, because either they don't know about it, or if they do, it's so full of red tape, it's bureaucratic. Either you have to wait 5 to 10 years to qualify. North Carolina could talk, Whitney could talk about that about North Carolina. You may have to pay, I think in Louisiana, up to $550 per offense to get your record cleared, and then you may have to get a lawyer. So if your crime was being poor, you cannot just access getting your record cleared. And so this is very personal to me, because outside of 1 in 3 Americans having a record, outside of 94% of employers, 90% of landlords, and 72% of colleges and universities use background checks, that creates barriers for millions of people. I do this for the things that data cannot tell you. Dignity, as you were talking about. Humanity, things that we can't measure on a report form. Things like people not wanting to die being defined by their record. I could tell you a story of me going to an expungement clinic in Miami, and we had hundreds of people come through, because in Florida, you only could get 1 non-conviction off your record. Yes, 1 non-conviction. And let me just put this in context. What Clean Slate is doing, I come back. I'm a spider webber. I spider web. I jump, but honey, one thing about a spider web, it's really beautiful if you get close up to it. It's all webbed all nicely. We have helped 6 states pass Clean Slate laws that has resulted in 3 million people getting their records cleared. You can clap to that, because you understand. We understand it up here. They don't understand yet, but I'm coming to y'all. 3 million people getting their record clear, removing barriers so people can move on, get a job, get housing. I mean, it's just one part of it. But in Florida, it was just hundreds of people coming out on a weekday to get their record cleared, just get 1 non-conviction off their record. And it was this older guy. We was closing up. The DA put this on with the public defender, and we're leaving the expungement clinic last summer. And this elderly guy who had a really bad case of Parkinson's, at that time I didn't know, was struggling to get to the front door to this community center. And I was like, he must be here for something else. So I helped him to the chair. We all helped him, get him some water. And he looks up and say, can you show me where to go to get my record cleared? And all I could think about, this guy did not come to find a job, get housing, but he didn't want to die being defined by his record. So these are the things, the reason why people always ask, why you come to the work? These are the reasons why I stay in the work.
Yeah. I love that you set it up as a cancer, because you did the data. If 1 in 3 Americans has a criminal record, and it's costing America, you're right, both of you and Whitley, it's a moral issue. If you're in here, you should care about it because it's a moral issue. It's also a fundamentally, uniquely American issue. It costs us more than $182 billion annual in lost gross domestic product, right? we love to tax. Oh, we love to tax the middle Americans, right? Not everybody equally, but as a country, that's how much of our workforce, that's how much of GDP that we leave on the table because we won't allow people to restore their dignity. When I hear that statistic, I think mass incarceration is just uniquely American. What do you guys think? Why do you think this issue is something that every American, more importantly, needs to understand and act on? Because that's the thing about it. I always think mass incarceration, to your point, Sheena, is akin to sort of like LGBTQ. If 1 in 3 Americans are touched by it, we all need to be coming out. It shouldn't be something that is a cloak of shame. It's a real thing that a lot of folks are dealing with. Why do you guys think everyone needs to understand this and be out in the streets getting activated on it?
I just want to say, I think more folks are understanding it. I just left speaking at the Milken Conference. I'm just going to tell you, I didn't even know what a Milken Conference was, okay? And how many people know what the Milken Institute
Tell
is?
the people what it is.
Okay. Well, they don't want it in my words, so maybe you should tell them what it is. I mean, it's just like real smancy conference with guys in nice blue suits talking about inflation and how they can make money in capital, all this other stuff. But I had this opportunity to go speak to these folks. And I mean, you have to pay like at least $50,000 to even be in a room. And so I got to do this panel to talk about second chances. You know, I had John Legend there, so that helped. So I'm on a panel, but when I left that room, and this is any room I go to and I talk about clean slate, second chances, I have people from all walks of life, all economic status, all political persuasions, who pull me aside and say, you just gave my story, my parents' story, my sister's story, my brother's story. And, you know, and in this room, they was like, I was able to pay my way out, but that arrest is still there. You know, their skin, their privilege got them a little further ahead, but they still feel that cloak of shame because it's there. And so it's no matter if I'm walking in, Republican halls, Democratic halls, I have never left the office on Capitol Hill where someone said, I could resonate with that story. 1 in 3 means it is our family, it's our church members, it's our kids' families and friends. It's close to home, so you can't ignore it. And I just think, I don't think that the issue is we talk about it differently. So we're saying the same thing, whether you're Republican, conservative, Democrat, progressive, in the middle, don't know where you're going. It doesn't, like, we're saying the same thing, we just message it differently.
Terrell, why do you think this is something that every American needs to be concerned about and getting activated on?
Yeah, I was hoping you didn't come to me because I don't have the answer to why, but what I can say what is missing. Yeah. And I really feel like the point that I made, which was I'm succeeding, post-prison, I immediately thought about others who were still on the inside and were eventually going to make it home. That trait, that caring about people who may or may not look like you, I think is what's normally missing from this space. Because like you said, I think while I can't afford a $50,000 event to go to,
me either.
When I'm in this bougie gym that I go to, I'm in the sauna, and I'm, just talking to other men in there, all white men, and someone will ask me, what I'm doing for work or whatever the case, and I share my story openly. And someone will say that, like you said, my father was locked up or my nephew was locked up. I will say, though, I think the black experience is much different than our white counterparts. Normally, in the white family, we keep that on the hush. It's taboo. We may, separate from that family member. In our situation, more often than not, we rally around to try to support. We down there to see them every single weekend. When they come home, you need a place to stay. Not in everyone's situation, but the dynamic as a whole, we don't really, keep hush about that. And then I think in some cases, it's more of a badge of honor for those who are like in the streets. But then to do what we're doing in our network, that's the actual badge of honor. It's that I lived through this. I have a record. I'm not afraid to share it. But guess what I also did? So are you going to judge me on my past, or are you going to judge me based on my accolades since then? And to get people to understand that piece right there is the challenge. That's what's missing, for people to actually care. Because, you hear a lot of the times that folks would say, these are people that are gonna move to your neighborhoods. And I look around the room and I'm like, ain't nobody moving to their neighborhoods. The guys that I know that's still locked up, they're not gonna be anywhere moving next door to them. So you gotta remove that argument. They're not coming to live next door to you, but it's about caring about other human beings and showing more humanity.
Well, they're already in the community. They ain't never
Right.
leave
That's
because they got
exactly
arrested.
right.
They already in the community.
When you, Senator Miranda, Whitley, you guys are working with state policymakers, you're working with coalitions to pass law. How are you getting people to say this is something we all need to care about?
So a lot of times we talk about the criminal legal system as a separate sort of institution and sector. The way that I've brought this work front and center, Massachusetts through COVID-19 passed some really aggressive, progressive legislation to make voting easier. Vote by mail, you can shorten the timeline to register to vote. We passed almost everything except same-day voting, which is very, very popular. In that work, I helped to pass something called jail-based voting, which is like the precursor to felony enfranchisement. We found out that there were 8,000 to 10,000 people in the state of Massachusetts held in either pretrial detention or serving a misdemeanor who had the right to vote. But while they were in the 15 Department of Correction facilities in Massachusetts, and let me add this, there are only less than 6,000 people incarcerated in Massachusetts Department of Corrections. We've cut that percentage of people being incarcerated, going home on parole or probation, or just free in three parts. There were over 15,000 people in the 90s. So now we have less than 6,000 people. And out of that, and the people who are in houses of correction, pay attention to your houses of corrections, y'all. The sheriffs can be a big problem. I think as a legislator, I was pushed to kind of focus on the DOC. And then people kept saying, well, I'm in county. And when I went there, there's such huge disparities because if you don't represent that county, you may not be knowing what's happening egregiously at that institution. I say all that, the 8,000 to 10,000 people were either in pretrial detention or serving a misdemeanor. They had the right to vote but no access. The Department of Corrections was not doing anything to make sure that these people voted. Why? Most of these people were counted on the census of those towns and cities. None of them were inner city communities. So you get money from the federal government for the 5,000 people that are incarcerated in various cities or towns, but you were very fearful of them actually having access to the ballot, because what if they put that their address was Norfolk DOC, right? Then they could determine, because there were so many people in those prisons, they could determine who was the mayor, the town manager, who got to be a city councilor. But those young men and women, most of the time, were from my community, so disconnected by distance, but still felt like home was the neighborhoods. So we worked so hard to pass jail-based voting because I made it an issue of democracy. This is a voting rights issue. This is a racial justice issue. It's not just a criminal justice issue for those people over there. And what I found, that I made a lot of friends on people who cared about democracy. It wasn't about whether someone had been locked up or not. They were just people that wanted to make sure that the access to the ballot was given to everyone as a fundamental right of this country. This country, we the people. So we the people counts everybody. And so that's what's helped Massachusetts get further now. We have
Whitley, let me get you in here. So the senator talked about being able to reframe an issue to make it more expanse. How do you guys think about approaching that work when you're doing things in North Carolina?
I think that's right, but I think sometimes it's not always even the framing, it's just awareness. We had a lobby day last week where we had 10 bills related to second chances, one of which was giving people access to SNAP and TANF benefits after having a drug felony conviction. And many of the people that we spoke with that are making these laws didn't know that people couldn't get food stamps once they were convicted of a drug felony. And when we bring 500 people that have experienced this to the General Assembly to share their story so that they can know that this exists, that brings about change. And sometimes you do have to change the narrative and change how you talk about things. I have had advocates in the General Assembly tell me that they don't believe in second chances, but they might believe in a strong economy. And when we are keeping people out of work, when we have more jobs than we actually have people to fill those jobs because they have convictions, that's not smart economically. And so we have to think about the ways that we talk about these things, because not everyone believes in human dignity like we talked about. Not everyone believes that everyone deserves a second and third chance, but there's lots of reasons that these things need to pass. And proximity is very important. I spoke with a young man who told me he was going to law school this year, and he really wanted to be a part of this movement. He came to our Second Chance Lobby Day, and I'm like, how did you get involved? What makes you want to do this work now? And he's like, my uncle got locked up, and I saw the problems and the flaws in the system. And when we have 1 in 3 people that are impacted by this, that proximity is gonna hit more and more and more. And so we have to continue to have these conversations, continue to talk about it, because if we don't talk about it, nothing's gonna get done.
Malik, substance use in particular can be an issue, even mental and behavioral health, of individual blame. It's something that individual is doing. So when TASC, which is an organization that also does incredible policy work to be able to raise resources to support the programming that you guys do, how do you guys think about winning allies and framing that issue as something that every citizen should care about?
Yeah, so we have a rather robust advocacy, research, and policy department. And one of the things that we find that's extremely effective is personalizing the experience that individuals with records have, and doing a better job of articulating how those challenges keep them locked out. I myself, we utilize my narrative. If some of you were to look at my LinkedIn profile or read my resume, you'd probably make some assumptions about my background. You'd probably think, well, you know, he's got a law degree, he's worked for a U.S. congressman, he's worked for a mayor, he's worked for a U.S. senator, he knows Barack and Michelle Obama, so he must come from a very privileged background, not to mention the fact that he's a member of the greatest fraternity known to God and man. You would make some assumptions about
He's
me.
a Kappa,
Which
y'all.
fraternity
Well,
is it?
it's only one. It's only one. And so you would make those assumptions that I had this silver spoon upbringing, but that's the furthest from the truth. I grew up about 4 or 5 blocks from Cabrini Green housing project, probably one of the most violent housing projects in the 80s on the front cover of New York Times. I had, as a young man, I was wayward, got involved in a lot of criminal activity and behavior, made some very poor decisions, which followed me on to college. And in college, I went to Southern Illinois University. For those of you that are not familiar with Southern Illinois University, back in the 80s, it was on Sports Illustrated as the top 3 party schools in the country. And during my freshman year, I made a stupid mistake. And that mistake landed me in the Jackson County Jail. And this is during the Clinton era. You got to remember, this was during the era where it was the 3 strikes and you're out. And I ended up taking I was locked up over the weekend. Ended up raising, my bail was like $300-something, but for a college student, that was still a lot of money back then, but I was able to do that. And the attorney I had at the time just basically told me, listen, you've been charged with a Class X felony, but the state's attorney is willing to offer you a plea deal. They'll break it down to a burglary as opposed to residential burglary. You'll get 3 years probation. And you pay your $300 fine. That's part of the bill that you just released. And then I said, where do I sign? Not knowing the implications of a felony conviction. Okay? Ended up going to law school, and I'm going to tell you a little story about this. Went to a top-tier law school, University of Illinois College of Law, did very well. Came out, and I was denied the ability to sit for the bar because of my felony conviction. And we're talking 20 years later, right, that they still would not. And I had to go in front of a character and fitness committee, which is like a 7-panel committee, and it felt like I was being tried again. Literally, they had an attorney, I had an attorney, and we went through what happened. And my attorney, by the way, was Don Hubert, who was the first African-American president of the Chicago Bar Association, who took my case pro bono because he couldn't believe that I was being denied. And he was the attorney's attorney. So whenever attorneys got in trouble with the ARDC, they hired Don Hubert. So he was at the top of his game, right? My character witnesses included Jim Compton, who was the former president and CEO of the Chicago Urban League. And by the way, that's one of the reasons why the Urban League movement has a special place in my heart, because Compton gave me my first job out of law school, even though he knew I had a felony conviction. He was one of my character witnesses. State Senator Barack Obama, he was state senator at that time, was one of my character witnesses. Earl Neal, who was one of the, at the time, the most powerful black attorney in Chicago, was one of my character witnesses. Illinois Appellate Court Justice William Cousins, another character witness. And finally, the dean of the law school, who said, you need to because you did well, you deserve to sit for the bar. We went through that 3-day trial, and I lost on a vote from 4 to 3. And they still said that I could not, and I did not have fit character to be an attorney. It's one of the reasons I do the work I do now, because of that experience and some of the other experiences I've had where I've sat or been interviewed for a position, filling out the application, and the question comes up. Have you ever been convicted of a felony? Sitting there trying to figure out how should I answer this? Or as my career advanced, being interviewed by executive search firms and practically being offered the position as the CEO or the COO or the executive director, up until they asked me the question, is there anything about your background that we need to know? So I understand the anxiety that individuals with records face. I also understand some of the ongoing systemic barriers that individuals with records face. And at some point, we have got to come to grips with the question on whether or not we believe in redemption. Let's stop playing this game, right? We either believe in redemption or we don't. And we can't continue to have individuals go through life with the scarlet letter because of a stupid mistake that they made.
One of the things, Malik, thank you so much for sharing that story, is the irony is that, the flip side of the coin is that after all that, what Illinois lost is another brilliant black mind, another brilliant black lawyer at the courts. We have your mind. I always say that the cure for cancer is sitting in a U.S. prison because we take for granted that there's all this talent that we are squandering. Sheena, I know you wanted to jump in.
Well, Brother Malik don't look like what he been through, as this sister was trying to say. So, but I want to say Malik, said all the things he had to go through for the character fitness test. But I just want to let people know, people go through this for a regular 9-to-5 job, employment, housing, even down to trying to volunteer at the children's school. And that's my story. And so, 2004, I'll just make this really quick. 2004, I had 2 officers knock at the door on a school day while my children were playing. And they came to the door and let me know they was taking me to the jail for a warrant for passing a worthless check for $87.26. And I went to jail that day. In front of my children, got handcuffed, taken to jail. And I got out pretty quickly, had to pay off that check, pay off fines for getting arrested, which was more than the amount of the check and all the things. But that stigma that you talked about, trying to apply for housing, trying to volunteer at my children's school, when they ask you, hey, do you have a background? And then I reluctantly say, you know what? I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to check the box, so I'm just not going to engage in my children's education program. That's millions of people. And going back to you had the damn near president on your witness or whatever you call it thing, Character and Fitness. About 3 years ago, my family and I, we were all packed up looking for a new home after we passed Amendment 4. You know, we thought we was doing something. We ready to go move on up like the Jeffersons. So we was like, you know, his credit was good, mine. I'm like, so we're gonna at least go get us a new house, a gated community. And we kept getting denied. Now, this is the same month my husband had a day proclamation done giving him his own day in Orange County. Time 100. Now nominated for Nobel Peace Prize, but yet we were getting denied rental houses because we checked the box. And so these are the things that people have to deal with, the stigma of being, you know, and what took us to get into a home finally was writing a long behind letter about who we are, who our children is. I even put the 2 little fluffy white dogs in there, y'all. Because I knew that if nothing else would get us in, the dogs will get me in. They got us in, so we got a home. But I'm just saying that stigma, and you know, we publicly share our story. I saw my husband publicly share a story all the time, write a book, but the shame that came about him, nervousness about, am I letting my family down because my record, he was feeling that as his record was holding us back from getting safe housing.
It doesn't feel fair to ask you guys this because everybody on this panel has done some extraordinary work. But I can't help but ask, if 1 in 3 Americans are impacted by this issue, if it's costing us billions of dollars a year, if some of the best innovation and talent we are incarcerating, we are locking up and locking out, what still needs to be done to make a way for folks who are coming home, who make a way for folks who are touched by this system? Even with everything that you've already done, what's missing? What do we need to do?
I'd say that from our standpoint, you know, our lens is you can't look, so the criminal legal system is also tied to healthcare. There are consequences, right, without reform to the criminal legal system for the cost of healthcare. Many of our clients that are coming out of prison, as I mentioned, a lot of them have active substance use disorders. A lot of them have chronic disease. Unfortunately, because of the way that state prisons are funded, they are not receiving optimal treatment while they're incarcerated. So, one of the things that we're pushing for, and it's happening right now in California, they're going to roll out a pilot, is to extend the 1115 Medicaid waiver to individuals who are incarcerated. This will allow prisons to access Medicaid to pay for health care while they're incarcerated. But it also allows us, so right now, if you're incarcerated, you're not eligible for Medicaid, right? Another barrier, right? Another way that you're locked out. It'll allow organizations like ours, who are again, we have pre-release teams co-located within the prisons that coordinate this reentry plan. Well, guess what? One of the things that we can now coordinate on is to identify a primary health care provider for when they're released. And so, not only do they now have access to housing, transportation, but they also now have access to quality health care. And access to health care within those first 72 hours is critical, right? Just like housing is. What we have found, and one of the challenges we're faced with right now, is there are a high number of individuals who are leaving prison whose opioid addiction was never addressed. They get out, the first thing they're doing is they're shooting back up and they're ODing. And so it's a huge problem right now, particularly in rural communities, believe it or not, a big issue. So I would say extending the 1115 waiver to individuals that are incarcerated is something we need to do.
I think that's huge. So Malik says we need to treat people, we need to get some innovation, because that's what the 1115 waiver is. It allows states and local jurisdictions basically to innovate with that Medicaid match money. So what's missing? Who else?
What's missing is compassion. That's what's missing. We talk about the numbers, we talk about the data, but we don't talk about the fact that we're talking about human beings. We're talking about people's mothers, we're talking about people's fathers, and the people that are in power are talking about felons and ex-offenders and criminals, and that's not what we're talking about. And so what we have to do is we have to keep going. The people that are in power, that are putting these laws in place that are holding us back, aren't going to stop, and so we can't either. And so we have to continue to push forward and try to change the narrative, because we can talk about this in ways that appeals to others, but we also at the same time have to make people understand that we are talking about human beings, bring this to their level. The person that I met with last week that said, well, my uncle got locked up. Everyone's uncle shouldn't have to get locked up for you to understand how this actually permeates in our communities. And so really being able to sit in front of someone that's never talked to someone that has a criminal record and show them that you're not very different from who they are. You go to the same church and you drive on the same roads and you pay the same taxes that these folks pay, to show that we're not very different, and bring that humanity and compassion back into people, and to not get tired, to not give up. Because that's what they want. They want us to give up.
I love that. Okay. I'm a little later on time than I had hoped to be. Okay, thank God, y'all. When they put the sign up on me, I said I've never done so poorly on managing time. Rapid fire, and not that rapid. We got 10 minutes, but I want to go around and say, what's giving you hope right now? What's making you hopeful? And you set it up perfectly. What's the thing when you look out in the world and you say, for all the reasons why they want us to be tired, why they want us to be discouraged, why they're disenfranchising our vote, I'm still hopeful because?
Well, first, I really want to say that's crazy. I thought your story was going to wind up being different than what it was once you basically had to assemble the Avengers to try to pass this.
Right?
It was everybody, wasn't it?
When you said you didn't, they still didn't. I was like, I wanted to just sink in my seat, like, what? That's crazy. But what you said about, changing the narrative and, still like what's missing. If you notice, like no one on this panel used the term ex-offender or ex-inmate, and that's how people with lived experience or those who are directly impacted by the system are often referred to by the people who are writing and passing the laws. That's how we're defined by those who have the employment opportunities. They will call you everything from ex-criminal, ex-murderer, everything but extraordinary, right? Or exceptional. They won't use those words and terms. So yes, that narrative has to change, because how you refer to people is how you're going to view them. If all I do is call you a murderer and a robber, a thief, a criminal, why am I going to treat you anything other than that? So that absolutely needs to change. I think what also has to happen is like a redistribution of power. I think when you say, if someone hits you, you hit them back, that's very different than saying if someone hits you, you protect yourself. So I'm gonna stop short of saying like we need to eat the rich, right? I think we just need to redistribute the power in this country. And what that is going to take is like more brave souls. And to, talk or respond to what your last question is about is like, what gives me hope? And I think seeing, system impacted people now begin to run for office. It started with drafting legislation from the inside. Men and women coming home and still helping with policy efforts, shifting from me just being only my story to now like helping movements get passed in Florida and really impacting lives on the national stage. Like things like that really make me hopeful that, this status quo is going to change at some point. But it's going to take people from, all parts of the political spectrum, income brackets, tax brackets, whatever the case. It's going to take people who don't have that, oh, my cousin, my family member, or my friend is locked up. And that empathy is where that part comes in at.
Humanizing. Whitley?
I think what gives me hope is the change that we're seeing. We're making moves, we're making changes. When I started this work, The only possible way to expunge your record in North Carolina was to wait 15 years and have one conviction. We have made changes since then. We have automation of expunction of dismissed charges. We have 5-year waiting periods for some convictions. I represented people that got convicted with felonies or got charged with felonies because they voted while on probation. We expanded the vote to 56,000 people who were convicted of felonies in North Carolina last year. Now the Supreme Court just reversed that, but we're gonna keep going forward because that was historical. And that's what keeps me going, because if we don't fight this, who will? And so we have to continue that. And you keep saying the people, that's what moves me. Seeing the hundreds of people show up for Lobby Day because they care about these things, because they impact their personal lives. If I give up hope, that's giving up on the livelihoods of hundreds of thousands of people that are my people.
And that passion is
And I'll
contagious.
stop there.
No, that's good, Senator.
3 things give me hope. One, this generation, they're not taking any shit, and I love it. You know, I felt like, you know, when I was coming into this work, we still were trying to be politically correct and make room for people. This generation's like, move out the way, you had 25 years, and we're not waiting anymore. Second, more representation. State legislatures are the problem. State legislatures are the problem. And so we need to make sure that we're running for office, but supporting people that can become either AGs, DAs, and or state reps or state senators, because a lot of our states have these laws embedded for hundreds of years in our state legislatures. And I think the third thing that gives me hope is the same thing Terrell said. When I started going to visit my brother, I had a third brother who was incarcerated at the time I was elected. I was the only person in the Massachusetts legislature that had a family member in DOC. As I would go visit him, I started visiting more people, and that led me to go visit other jails. We have in Massachusetts the right as a state legislator to visit any jail at any time without cause. But no one takes that up. It's like 10 of us that do that. But the idea is that the reason they've been able to get away with so much in the Department of Correction is because people are not going. We're not looking. And when I took the Speaker of the House to visit one of the jails, he was like, you know, on the glass, he's looking at it, he didn't know what to do. I said, Mr. Speaker, grab the phone, talk to the man. But he didn't even know how to have that conversation. Now, I've been doing that since I was 9 years old, so I knew what to do, but he did not even know. And that experience fundamentally changed his perspective. So I would say the third thing is making sure that we're using the rights and afforded to us to build these coalitions inside and outside with state legislators to be able to make the type of difference, to make these small changes. And like you said, one change led to 50,000 people. Maybe one change leads to 5,000 people in your state, but then the next change leads to 15,000 people. We have to take those small steps.
I love that. And I also believe you taking the speaker there means he's going to take somebody else.
Yeah.
Right? Sheena?
There's a few things that give me hope. I will try to bust it down to 3 like you just did. So boom, boom, boom. So I stay focused. Yeah. So the one thing that definitely gives me hope is like real change, like impact, like, you know, changing hearts and minds and seeing like real impact. For instance, I'll give you an example. In Michigan, was it last month, Jesse? I always like to say, my team probably don't like this, that we pushed the button. That means it went live, it implemented. And 1 million people got their record clearance in one day, over 1 million people in one day. And one of the young ladies who have been dealing with her record for over 18 years sent me an email with a picture, like, I don't even know how she got, I gave her my email, that's how. But she was like, that's how she sent me like a screenshot of her, like, look, they can't find me. Finally, I feel free, I'm floating on cloud nine. She wrote this long email, just so excited. And I was so excited, and I was like, this is why we do this. I shared it with the team, and I invited her on one of our team calls. We'll never invite nobody on a team call. And she was like, I just feel so good. Like, I don't know what to do. I finally get a job. She couldn't even volunteer in her child's lunchroom. She was like, finally, I feel like a new person. And so that gives me hope. And then people in my inbox, whether it's LinkedIn or Instagram, are like, y'all fighting a good fight. That one person, if I give up, if I look discouraged, I know that millions of other people will get discouraged and they will lose hope. So I got to keep pressing on for that. That's one thing. The other thing is, 10 years ago, I remember the days when my husband would be in a room sitting in a crowd like y'all, and everybody was policy folks talking about what we should do for the folks who have a record. Couldn't even get to the front. Couldn't even get a mic in his hand. And now, as you see this representation that John Jay, and I appreciate that people who have lived experience, who are closest to the pain, who is closest to the solution, who's now getting resourced to do this work, is leading the conversations and the strategy in these campaigns. So really excited about that. That gives me hope, because years ago it wasn't that. We have plenty of leaders out there, I could start naming them all, that's leading some great work, and finally they're getting their flowers, they're getting recognition, they're getting the resources they need to do this work in an intentional way. And the last thing I would say is, you know, this is more on the philanthropic side, and like shout out to public welfare. Candice has done a great job transforming the way millions of dollars is going to the field to justice impacted leaders and people doing that work. But the way that philanthropy is shifting, realizing they can't do this without us, and we can't do no change, and their economy's not better unless we better. And so seeing that these institutions, so we getting that money, bro, don't worry, it's coming in different trickles. We could get more, but that philanthropy is putting the money where their mouth is. So that's the thing that's also giving hope. And stepping back, saying we trust you to do the thing that you said you could do.
So, well, I'll keep it at 3 since everybody else is doing 3. Well, I'll keep it at 3. So the first is, I had the fortunate opportunity last week to travel to Rome to represent TASC at the Rome Consensus 2.0, which was a gathering of dignitaries from around the world that work on drug policy in different countries. And unbeknownst to me, because of the success we're having in the U.S. with criminal justice reform, we're viewed by some countries as the standard bearer. That was really interesting to see that, right? And so that gave me hope, like, well, we must be doing something right. We got a long way to go, but that was a very interesting perspective because it helped me to contextualize the work that we do, and to celebrate some of the victories that we've made. The second is policymakers and philanthropy are starting to understand the role that access to housing plays in successful reentry. The number one barrier facing individuals who are returning from prison is housing insecurity. There are 600,000 individuals returning from prison every year that face housing insecurity, and as a result of not being able to access housing, they end up recidivating, or worse yet, they have their paroles violated. That is absolutely unacceptable. And so if you think about Maslow's hierarchy, right, at the very bottom of the pyramid is security. I can't think about treatment. I can't think about trying to go get a job. I can't think about reuniting with my family if I'm couch surfing, or worse yet, I'm homeless. And so we've been able to launch, with the support of philanthropy and state government, a permanent supportive housing model. We've been doing it for the last year and a half. We have successfully placed 78 justice-involved adults with substance use disorders into permanent housing. We pay 24 months of their rent, and we have not had one eviction. And so we know that it works, and we're looking to expand that. And then last but not least, seeing more organizations that are doing this work, hiring people with lived experience, and not just at the front line, but throughout the entire hierarchy of the organization. And I think that's critically important because people don't care what you know until they know you care. And we know, from doing this work for 47 years, that the individuals with lived experience in our organization demonstrate a higher level of empathy when working with our clients, and that's critically important toward helping them on their journey to recovery.
I love it. I want to open it up for questions. Right here in the second row, and maybe, am I walking to you with the mic? Okay. I said, Lord, have mercy, my over 40 knees. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, my name is Shujab Moore. I'm an independent filmmaker and community advocate from the Philadelphia area. And it's always embarrassing to say this, but I'm also somebody who spent 12 years in prison. So, I'm one of them guys. And first, on behalf of all the guys that did time, I just want to say thank you for the work that you all are doing. It's amazing stuff. And thank you for everybody that's even in this room. I used to watch stuff like this on C-SPAN, like, wow, somebody actually cares. There's a lot of things I would like to respond to. You talking about the word inmate. That's the new N-word. Let's be clear. That's what inmate means, right? We know who's locked up. You talked about when people come home, they may not move to certain neighborhoods, but they probably will be working at your local Walmart or driving a bus or your server at your favorite restaurant. So they are all around us. Let's be clear. But anyway, I don't want to go off on a tangent. I'm here. I came from Philly, caught the bus, don't really know my way around New York, but I made sure I got here for this particular panel because I made a film called Pardon Me. It's about exactly what you guys are talking about, making an economic argument for why we need to wipe these criminal records away, how these criminal records hold people back, but also the fact that the governors of every state has the power to wipe away state-level offenses. We need to use it more. This shouldn't be something that just happens at the end of a term or for a president or a governor's buddies, And I wanted to know, my question to you all, again, is, to wrap this up, is how are you using film and media for the work that you do? And how could somebody like me, who is already in this field, creating media to change hearts and minds, as you talked about, how could I use my work to help you guys?
Love that. Sheena.
So, first thing to the brother, welcome home. Appreciate you coming up here. My family's from Philly, so North Philly, West Oak Lane in the house. Okay. So, and I'm actually speaking at Cheney College, giving a commencement on Saturday. So, yeah, we doing some things. Philly. But I thank you for your question. One, I do also want to say, in Pennsylvania was the first state to pass clean slate, and so far they have cleared over like 60 million records. 1.5 million people have been impacted, and they're going back to expand it to felonies getting passed, and they are leading the way there. And so you should probably just check out their website. We could connect with you after this. But I was just actually film media is an area that we are seeing more people get hip to. I know that I'm always trying to figure out ways to engage influencers. John Legend is one person who's been really big on this, like really the dude like nerds out on this. He really cares about this issue. He helped with Amendment 4 with the fines and fees, and recently with Clean Slate, was on a panel with him. I was in a movie, a documentary called Home Free. It just came out. Oh, all right, you already Googling your stuff. Okay, Home Free, but it gave a platform to talk to folks who are formerly incarcerated about the stories and the barriers that they're facing. And one thing I told folks, because the music, I don't know if this is recording, but the music is so sad. I'm like, why is the music so damn sad in this movie? And when I told some people, like, well, what you want people to take away from the movie? I'm like, not the sadness. I was like, don't take away the pain. Take away the promises that you saw. The promises seen that the folks who are extraordinary now, that are doing some things, and the opportunities. And so we are also seeing, like, Kerry Washington got the show Unprisoned, and she's really trying to use that platform to lift up. And that show, like, her father was formerly incarcerated. But we are seeing where writers are inviting people like us in the room to say, how can we help with this narrative? And so I do feel hopeful about that.
I love that.
There was a film about a young man named Sean Ellis, 13, I think, or Trial 4. And it made such a huge impact. He did 19 years for a crime he didn't commit due to prosecutorial and police misconduct. And it was a Netflix series, and it went on for 13 episodes. So art and artivism is like super important to this message. I also saw it in police reform. I wrote the use of force section in the police reform bill in Massachusetts. And what I saw was there was these organizations that were doing these Instagram posts, like 1 in 8, was that what it was called? But it had 8 things that they wanted state legislatures to put in: no chokeholds, ban no-knock warrants, duty to intervene, create de-escalation tactics. Because some folks are at abolition, but there was many more folks that were just like, what can we do? And so the Instagram post really took off because for my colleagues that really didn't understand the work. It was a simplified way to share what the problem was. That yes, George Floyd was one man, but 1,000+ people are killed at the hands of police every year. And yes, in Massachusetts, that number might be 33, but that's still 33 families. It does happen here. So media is incredibly important. I would encourage folks to focus on YouTube and podcasting. I was in marketing before I got into politics too, that they're seeing shifts of like, not only is it film, but the reason why reels are working so much is because people can take a minute of information or 2 minutes, but when it gets longer than that, folks get distracted. And so if we use other mediums, we can actually share our message more clearly and effectively.
Other questions?
Take two more.
Back in the back. Back in the back.
In the back? Okay, we'll have her and now Panelists.
Thank you. My name is Claudia Rivera. I am with the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York. And my question is, have you engaged with federal courts that have reentry court programs for federal level returning citizens? And yes, language matters. We call it returning citizens, and I'm a huge advocate for that.
It's funny, my husband thought he coined that phrase, and I had to keep telling him he did not bring that. I was like, I promise you did not do that. Like, it was been a debate. I have engaged the courts, but we do have a federal bill that just got introduced for federal offenses, because there's no mechanism on the federal level to get your record cleared. So we are doing some work, clean slate, to address some of the federal offenses and having conversations. Reginald Darby, wave your hand. Y'all see him right there. Our federal legislative director could talk to you about that. And also maybe speak to some of the other partners that are doing some work on a federal level as well.
I know there tends to be a lot more emphasis on state level since the most of cases, but you're right, it's an important place to make sure we have a continuum as well. The question in the back.
And we could probably take one more.
Okay.
If you wanna. We'll go to the young woman right here in the middle.
Okay.
Okay, you are.
Thank you. My name is Hamilton. I'm a former youth voting rights organizer, and I just stepped into the criminal legal space. And so I just wanted to thank you all for speaking about democracy so much. It was just very refreshing to hear. What I wanted to ask is, like, in my experience working in the voting rights space and now stepping into criminal legal, like, sometimes when you're having conversations with people, they're clear that restoration of voting rights is an issue, but it's not like, it's not as big of a priority. And so as you all have advocated for this extremely well and have made it a priority, what were you all doing differently perhaps than other people in this space where they're just like, this is a democracy issue, and then the democracy people will say, this is a criminal legal issue? How did you reckon with that?
Let me ask you a question. What audience were you talking about? The people who are impacted, or like policymakers?
Like policymakers, or just in my experience with democracy organizations, like they'll be like, restoration is an issue, but we don't have capacity to give to that right now. And so how did you all like make it a priority where organizations are really looking, for example, in Florida, and looking at this and saying, we actually need to invest, we need to be serious about this and not just say it's important?
Well, this is the thing. The people who said it wasn't important wasn't the people impacted. So that's why they didn't really care. They didn't feel the pain of not being able to have their voice heard. They didn't feel the pain that the communities didn't have the right funding in their communities, because the people couldn't vote on it because half the population had an arrest record or a felony, and so they couldn't contribute to that community. So the thing was, we the people led that issue. But the one thing I would say is, I won't go back, when we were trying to organize directly impacted people to lead in that movement, it didn't start out with directly impacted people leading, other than like some of the visionaries, because people said, listen, you talking about voting, yeah, that's cool, but I need a job. I can't feed my family, I need housing. So it took awareness, like you were talking about, education, letting people know the power of the voting box. And now those same people are electing their district attorneys. And like the district attorney, 3 district attorneys got elected by returning citizens in the state of Florida. They took an incumbent out. We're not gonna talk about how the governor took that person out. But in Tampa, Florida, took a 15-year incumbent out, put in a reform DA in. In Orlando, put the first African-American DA in, and then Monique Worrell in office. They was elected by directly impacted people, returning citizens, after, though, teaching them, like, the power of a DA. And this is the thing. You have to, like, bring it back to the issues that people care about. People are not getting excited about candidates. Like, candidates ain't that sexy anymore, right? It's not really fun, and y'all know what I'm saying. You got to bring it to the issues. And so who's the best person to elect a judge, a sheriff, and a DA? It ain't fun when the rabbit got the gun, is what I heard, right? And when you let folks know, like, when we went back to those communities and we talked about judges, because I'm just gonna be admit, like, I don't know how many of y'all like know all the judges in your ballot. Like, sometimes I Christmas treated back in the day, I didn't know. But you bring it back to the people who've been impacted, who said that's the judge that locked people up, who don't even think about this, that. They start getting involved in the judges, the district races, and the sheriff races, and they start seeing the power of their voice in the ballot, and that start bringing more change about in our communities.
Sheena and I are saying the same things today, but we would have our clean slate clinics, and we would talk about these elections, and everyone's like, I'm not caring about this presidential election. And we're like, but did you know that the prosecutor that charged you with this charge that you can't get off your record is on the ballot? And so that brings people to the table. It also brings us back to the comment about storytelling and how important that is. So when we did our Unlock Our Vote campaign, we collected stories of people that are voting for the first time and the power that they felt to be able to express themselves in that way. And a lot of the feedback we got is when you've been convicted, you've been silenced for so long, sometimes you forget what it feels like to use your voice and to be able to express yourself. And we want to bring that out of people and allow them to do that. In North Carolina, our Chief Justice lost the race by 401 votes. There were 56,000 people eligible to vote because they had been convicted of felonies when we unlocked that vote. And so it makes a difference. And it may not be the talk of the media, but it absolutely makes a difference. And we had to let the media know that, the impact that it could have.
I'll just say 3 quick things. First, data. Show the numbers and show them repeatedly. People take 7 different ways. Like when they say you got to talk to a voter 7 times. I've run 3 elections. It's really true. They got to see a billboard. They got to see a text. They got to see your ad on TV or get a flyer at home. So the 7 ways show the data. The second is coalition building. What we found in Massachusetts is the voting rights organizations, mostly led by our grandmothers. I love my Nana, but it was like the NAACP was like 20 years behind because they were working just with the grandmothers, civic organizations. And so what we did when we did that coalition, I talked about the Brothers on the Inside, talked about civil rights organizations, then working with folks that were working in the criminal legal system. That was the special sauce. No one gets anywhere alone, right? And the idea is we need each other. The third was the creativity, the other question about using different modalities. It's super important because the brothers ain't reading the Globe, but they were on Facebook, they were on Snapchat, they were on TikTok, and so trying to get to them that way. So those are 3 ways that we encourage folks. And then the last thing, when I was running for office this last time, the Senate race was really intense, right? I still have PTSD. I'm like, I was twitching like I'm a senator. But one of the things we did is we used formerly incarcerated people to actually do the door knocking, and I didn't have to ask them. Because of the work that I'd been doing for 4 years, they showed up at my office like, yo, Liz, what you need us to do? They knocked doors, they made phone calls. Some folks didn't have a job, so they spent all day, but I paid them to basically call folks who were free that didn't know that they had the access to the ballot. So they created something called Flex the Vote. So I like the Unlock the Vote thing. I want to use that. But the Flex the Vote was to get to young people, formerly incarcerated people, and people that represented different Black and Latino ethnicities to know that they actually had the power to change this election, and it worked.
Yeah, let's take one more question. We started a few minutes late.
Hey, y'all, hey. Thank you. Seeing you is like, this representation right here, I can't even, like, first of all. Thank you, John Jay. I turned y'all down. I went to Howard. I'm so sorry. Real talk. Y'all here. Oh, okay, we everywhere. All right. I ain't gonna hold y'all. I have tons of questions. I have undiagnosed ADD. But what I'm gonna tell y'all is, so AOJ major. Hi, how y'all doing? What that is a sociological perspective to criminal justice. And I didn't know that until after I was in it. And I was like, why they got me taking all these classes in sociology and psychology and behavioral studies and all that? Like, I want to be an attorney. Like, why are we talking about this stuff? And here I am 20 years later, 25 years later, social justice, advocacy, activism, but all in the area of education. Why? Because I have a 9 and 11-year-old sons, and I'm 49, y'all. Pray. And what was happening is and we're in the middle of a community education council election. So if you live in New York, please vote. And because what they're talking about, this is what happens to brother, right? So he was a young person when he had that interaction, right? He wasn't an adult. And all day long, I've been burning because I'm like, okay, this is what happens after. What am I'm gonna tell my 9-year-old? How am I gonna impact early education so that they know, like, this is why we don't do that, son, or this is why we need fathers to be, so my question is, what's the proactivity looking like? Like, how do we bridge, because I'm here, like, I'm ready to get engaged, right? I mean, I'm gonna send my husband to y'all so y'all can help him with his record, and my nephew, right? But my son doesn't have one yet, and how do I prevent him from getting one?
I love to end on a future looking.
Glass half full. Just saying.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it starts with building community. I think that's like the most important thing. And while we have areas where there's lots of people, you know, congregating, living, or whatever the case, it's not really a community, right? The whole purpose behind when they're putting up, you know, a new building in the city of Newark or in New York, and they're talking about like having it be mixed income, setting aside a number of units for people with low income. It's not just to get people in that building. It's so that the idea is that mixing people from different incomes hopefully will bring those up who are earning the least in there. But when you have situations where you don't know the person that lived next door to you, which means when you walking by somebody that's trying to break in their car, you don't know who own it, so you don't care. You scared to tell, like, that's not what community is. But when you know, Grandma Smith that live across the hall, and you know her nephew and her grandson, so then when you see him doing something, you're gonna pull him by his ear, and now it's on that family to be okay with that. Don't start fighting each other saying that this ain't, don't touch my child. No, that's what community is. And if you think about that on that granular level, and then elevate that to what we've been talking about. So now when I'm sitting in front of this congressman, he's able to listen with an empathetic ear and not, again, think about like how he doesn't know because he hasn't lived you don't have to you don't have to be me in order to feel for me. I don't know what it's like to be, gay. I don't know what it's like to be a part of the LGBTQ community, but I don't listen to their stories and say, well, it's just difficult for me to understand. No, I have empathy because you're a person at the end of the day, right? And if we looked at people in the system like that, if we looked at people that came from any walk of life and just really put our personal experiences to the side and think more about that individual, again, it would eliminate not everything, but a lot of what we experience when we're pointing the finger at who's to blame and just thinking about the problems that exist.
I've said this, I've been saying this lately. I actually said this in my TED Talk, shameless plug, comes out on the 10th. Y'all look it up. I asked the room to think about all the second chances that you received, whether it was from your spouse, your loved one, your community, even your children. Think about what that felt like, what that did for you. My grandma used to say this saying, I ain't know what grandma used to say all these things. We ain't never knew what she was talking about. But now I'm older. She used to say, charity starts at home. And I had a convicting moment the other day, and I will share with you all, is, my son was on punishment. My youngest son was on punishment. And he did something, and, and he had to pay back something. And I remember because I was okay with him being on punishment for a long time. I was okay. And I had to think about it. If I'm talking about second chances, I got to give him a second chance to let him know it's okay for him to have a second chance and that forgiveness and redemption is real. He still got a little bit of punishment. But I had to let him know that you have a second chance. And then I even went even further. It was like, you know what? I can't be out here, Dad, paying off fines and fees. I ain't going to pay off your fine and fee. So I'm going to pay off your fine and fee. You'll pay me back. But it's what we do at home that nobody can see in front of our children. When you say proactive for your 9-year-old, showing them forgiveness, redemption, and love, that we do that in our household, he could do that when they're at school, and that start changing that mindset, that narrative about what second chances look like. So then when Mr. or Mrs. whoever gets in trouble, it's like, well, they did their time. They deserve a second chance. They deserve to be forgiven. So it's changing. It's almost going back to, you know, a child is not born racist. It's about what they are taught, what is seen. So we can't be out talking about second chances. But when we see the news and we see something on media, we're saying stuff in front of our children, making it like that's them versus us. So I would say charity starts at home.
I also, you know, when you think about some of the things that you ask for, if you indeed tell yourself that part of what you're fighting for in this moment in history is a world where your child is truly free, where his children are truly born free, where you don't give him the talk because he's a Black child, when you don't expect different educational outcomes or access because he's a Black child, when you expect that he could jump in a car with his 16, go out with his friends, maybe even do something stupid and come home safe and alive, you would be out here advocating for, writing legislation, running national policy that was indeed audacious. And so the truth is, each one of us, as we get up every single day, need to be working like we're working for that future generation's freedom. Y'all have a good night.